Welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Again, we are told the global economy risks skidding back into recession just 3 years after pulling out of the previous one. Growth is slowing in nearly every major country, and political uncertainties threaten recoveries in the U.S. and the Eurozone. Have any lessons been learned since the last financial crisis? To crosstalk the future of the global economy, I'm joined by Sujiro Takeshita in London. He is the director of Mizuho International. And in Chicago, we cross to Chris Cutrone. He's an adjunct assistant professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect, and that means you can jump anytime you want. If we go to London first, Sujiro, what do you think of what the IMF had to say? Because I read the language, and they're really worried here. This is not just a bump in the road. This is very serious. So for a lot of people in the world, the Great Recession is applicable still. It's not over. It's still going on.
Oh, no, certainly. What we're seeing is bounce back from advanced nation to emerging nations and back again to advanced nations. We're seeing the negativity that was initially emerged by the structural problem that was seen in Europe, which has affected the export conditions of these emerging nations, and now it's hurting the advanced nations again. On top of it, we've got the structural problem that's exacerbating, along with the regional problems, and many of the situations are signs of protectionism, along with a lot of regional dispute, for example, as you saw in China-Japan dispute right now. So things are getting a lot worse than it was.
Okay, Chris, I mean, has anything been learned from the last crisis? Because, you know, I'll be a real cynic here. The richest of the rich recovered very well from this. The banks are back online, particularly in the United States, okay? The Eurozone is a different question here. But the rich are been saved, okay? But we see all of these structural problems still out there that have been hardly addressed.
Well, I'm coming from an essentially Marxist perspective, and so I'm looking at it in terms of the freezing of capital, meaning that capital investments are not really happening. And so there's a question of stimulus versus austerity. And I think that a lot of the policy that's in disarray really goes back to the question of the crisis of neoliberalism and monetarism, and the perspective that some have of a return to a kind of Keynesian stimulus and investment strategy. I don't think that the prospects for that are very good.
Well,
but I do think
politically
that,
it's not very good. I mean, because that's asking people to wait a long time, okay? Politically, it's unsustainable. If we go back to London.
Well, yeah, that's very true. In fact, Japan has tried that methodology, and unfortunately that was taken in a very wrong concept. What it ended up with these Keynesian methodology, of course, it was executed in a wrong manner because they continued to invest in areas with very low multipliers, and what it ended up is, as you very well know, extremely high debt, with a deflation of almost 2 decades now. So basically, it's almost ironic that we're having this IMF meeting here in Tokyo. But the fact of the matter is that if we don't execute this, then you will have made a lot of burden for the generation to come. And in addition, how many countries can actually take that option of the Keynesian methodology? I think that is a very question to be asked in this Eurozone as well.
Okay. I'd like to also bring in Martin Hennecke. He's in Hong Kong. He's an associate director at the Teich Group. Martin, thank you for being with us. So do we need a lot more Keynesianism to fix the global economy on the back of what the IMF has recently said?
Well, firstly, I would say the IMF doesn't really have much credibility, so I wouldn't care whatever they say. Actually, it's just a waste of time. Just like the same as watching Obama and Romney debate, you wouldn't learn anything. Even if they knew the truth of what's really happening, they certainly wouldn't tell you. But did the IMF predict the 2008 financial crisis? No way, and they wouldn't tell you if there was a new one. So, you know, don't rely on that. But basically, in our view, the 2008 financial crisis wasn't ever fixed, not anywhere nearly. They just pampered over it or plastered over it for a while by putting government money at the problem. And now, as you have pointed out, you know, the government debt in all of the major Western countries and in Japan as well is extremely high. And we think there isn't any solution now at this stage because the debt is already out of control. Whether you try cutting to reduce the deficit, it's too late for that. Too late, too little. You know, the U.S. fiscal gap is $200 trillion US dollar. That couldn't be fixed with cutting even now. And on the other hand, if you print more money and put out more debt to stimulate, that also wouldn't work. There are only two solutions: either bankruptcies or debt default on a massive scale in all the major Western countries, or printing a huge amount of further
Martin, I think it's very interesting.
to get rid of the debt problem that way.
That's called quantitative easing. Chris, if I can go back to you, I don't want to ask a really technical question, but that's really the risk here, is that if people want to save their wealth, inflation's the only thing that's going to save the Western world right now, to wipe off all of this debt. Because politically, you cannot ask 3 generations to be poor.
Right. Well, it all depends on who you mean by preserving their wealth.
The top percent,
if we're
top
talking
1%.
About, right. And, you know, the issue there is, you know, from a broader perspective, how to get those people to start investing their money again, because they're being tight-fisted with it under the present circumstances. And so the question is whether austerity will ease, you know, the credit markets or not. I think that it's interesting that in Europe you have such, you know, division